They are a team that kind of wins with defense. 21.5 points per game allowed, which is sixth in the ACC. 322 yards per game allowed, which is fourth in that conference. They were fifth in the ACC in pass defense, second in the ACC in tackles per loss per game at over 7. The red zone touchdown percentage, they give up just 50%. So on red zone trips, only scoring on touchdowns every other trip down there, which you will take that as a defense. It's really solid. The fewest 20-plus yard pass plays allowed in the ACC this season. And I've mostly talked about pass defense, but rush defense, they've been perfectly solid as well. Had some games where they've given up some rush yards, but overall really solid. There's not a single defensive statistic you look at, whether it be, again, rushing defense, third down percentage allowed, none of that stuff where they are bad. They are at worst average in pretty much every defensive statistic to this point. And when you get into the advanced stats, they're above average. They are 21st in defensive EPA allowed, and they are 11th in defensive success rate allowed. So both in terms of, the efficient plays and then on a down-by-down basis, they have been outstanding defensively. And as I mentioned, they showed up against some really good offenses. They held Virginia to 9 points. They held SMU to 12 points. The most yards per game they allowed on the season was just 421 to Florida State. And that was a game that went poorly for them. 42-7 loss to the Noles. And Florida State averaged about 7.4 yards per play. That was a rough night for them defensively, but only 14 first half points allowed to Florida State. Things just kind of spiraled for them in that game. They've been really solid throughout the year, and it's a group that is going to be a test for a Mississippi State offense that has obviously been very inconsistent throughout the year, and obviously is going to have a true freshman quarterback starting in. Sven coming in with the Hail State. Haven't heard from Sven in a while. Shout out to you. Law and Tractor Life, giving a shout out to Ballard. So some of his buddies here in the chat.
Yeah,
again, this is a really good defense that you have from Wake Forest. And obviously they've got some outstanding players. Langston Hardy at the edge position, a transfer out of UConn, been fantastic. 7 sacks on the season, 17 tackles for loss, which is tied for the lead in the ACC. Another 8 quarterback hurries. As a pass rush as a whole, they are only averaging a little over 2 sacks per game. So it's not like a group that just constantly harasses quarterbacks, but a guy like Hardy is someone who can definitely live in the backfield and definitely get pressure. For a Mississippi State team that kind of has struggled at the tackle spot, that could be a little bit concerning here. In the secondary, got a pair of all ACC DBs and safety Nick Anderson and corner Karan Prunty. Anderson, 94 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 7 passes broken up. Prunty, 34 tackles, 8 passes broken up, and an interception. You also have nickelback Devon Patterson, who's had good numbers. Linebacker Dylan Hazen, again, kind of one of those fringe all-ACC guys. I think he was like an all-ACC honorable mention. Had a really solid season. There are fantastic players at every single level of this defense. It's going to be a group that's tough for State to contend with, and they're an attacking defense. I mentioned early on, second in the ACC in tackles for loss per game. This is a group that wants to get after you. Scotty Hazelton, the defensive coordinator previously at Michigan State, he also spent a year at Texas as an assistant last year. His name of the game, it's to create as much confusion as possible. It's confusion and disruption. That's what they're looking to do. They're going to do a ton of simulated pressures where they're bringing a bunch of guys up to the line, showing pressures and then dropping out of it, but mixing up, okay, who's coming and who's backing off. They're going to rotate the safeties. And, I mentioned you got one of those safeties with 94 tackles. They're going to get their safeties downhill involved in the run game. The linebackers like to attack. The defensive line, like I said, it's not a group that's crazy with the pass rush, but they are really disruptive up front, especially in run defense, where they're going to find ways to fight through blocks. And obviously this aggression at times can work against them, but they don't get gashed for a lot of big plays either. So really, they do a great job of creating as much confusion as possible. And look, I mentioned they had success against some really talented offenses this year. It's going to be a big test for the Mississippi State offense. State's offensive line is going to have a big game to really do a good job of protecting Kamario Taylor. But, the big thing for me, what I'm kind of excited about here is I think this is a great test for Kamario Taylor going up against a defense that is as good as Wake Forest, that is going to throw as much at him as Wake Forest will. That's a great test for the young quarterback. And look, I don't want to do the whole thing. This game doesn't matter. But if Mississippi State loses this game, if Mississippi State gets blown out, it's kind of just, all right, it is what it is. Christian, this is still going to be a great learning opportunity for Kamario Taylor getting to go up against this defense.
Win or lose, no doubt, man. I mean, I think it's going to be great for Kamario Taylor, like you say, just going up against a pretty solid defense in Wake Forest. And, I think Mississippi State fans with Kamario Taylor, I think if they're smart, I think we know he's the guy at quarterback. We just got to see him against really good competition. And even against the lower tier, if he comes in and looks good, or if, he played a couple group of five type games in his career already. But, whoever he goes up against, we just want to see the best out of him and hope that, he can be the guy to lead this Bulldog offense.
No doubt about it. And look, again, it's going to be a big test for him early on, but I like that. It's a big learning opportunity. This whole bowl game is a learning opportunity for Kamario Taylor, that you get a whole month, 15 practices with him as the starter in bowl practices, which obviously he got to be the starter leading into the Egg Bowl and got those practices. But I don't even think – I think the way Levy talked about it, because they had a bye week before the Egg Bowl, I think there's the fact that you were able to – I think he only got 1 week, because I don't think that decision was made until halfway through the year. I'm missing here. Halfway through that prep for the Egg Bowl, that he was ultimately named the starter. So he's getting a full week here, which is huge. Sven bringing up, Wake has nobody on the schedule he can call good outside of Georgia Tech. Duke put near a 50 program. I think we're a better team. We'll handle them without problems. Virginia is legitimately good. That's a top 25 team. SMU, I think SMU is a good football team. I understand SMU kind of had a weird year, but SMU is a good football team. They shut down both of those offenses. Two offenses that I would say are better than Mississippi State's. Georgia Tech, you look at the final stat line, Georgia Tech finished with a fine day. Georgia Tech had 3 points at halftime in that game. So they did fine against Georgia Tech in that matchup as well. Yes, there's a lot of teams on there. They're not particularly good. Florida State blowing them out. And, NC State was not a great football team. There was a bowl team, but they lose by 10 at home in that game. The Duke game was weird. They outgained Duke by a lot. They put up a lot more yards on Duke than they allowed, but still got the loss there. I believe some turnovers played a role in that matchup. I don't entirely know for sure. But, I think they're still a pretty good football team. If you give Wake our schedule, they go 3-9. Maybe. I don't know. I think, I'm not saying they would definitely go for a bowl game, but I think they're good enough. They would have found, they could beat an Arkansas. I'm not saying that they couldn't beat somebody else. And also State's non-conference opponents this year, like Arizona State ended up not being just incredible. Like if they can beat Virginia and SMU, like they could beat Arizona State. I think they definitely beat Southern Miss. They definitely beat NIU. Ended up being terrible. They're going to beat Alcorn. So, and I think they could have beaten Arkansas, and they could have I wouldn't rule them out beating Florida. I think I'm not saying they're an incredible football team. And look, Mississippi State, to be clear, is the favorite in this game. The numbers like Mississippi State better, but I think Wake probably is. They're pretty similarly rated to Mississippi State in terms of results. I don't think they're a 3-9 football team against this slate. So look, it's a defense again that has been really solid throughout the year. It's going to be a big test for Mississippi State and big test for Kamario Taylor. But look, State's guys are going to have to step up for sure and kind of rally around him. When you go to the other side of the ball, it's kind of been an up and down year. So for the season, Wake Forest has averaged about 27 points per game, a little bit below. Not putting up a ton of yardage, 389 yards per game, but at 5.9 yards per play, which 5.9 yards per play is fine, nothing incredible. I know Christian held a few of these guys earlier. Robbie Ashford in at quarterback, 2,169 yards, 59% completions, 7.5 yards per attempt, 9 touchdown passes to 7 picks. He has also run for 504 yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Ashford is a very up and down player, which you see it for a guy who's obviously the former 4-star recruit coming out of high school, was a big-time signee at the time, who has had to bounce around quite a bit. He's on his 4th program. You see some moments where you kind of see that talent that he had coming out with the mobility and some of the arm talent that he has. But obviously you also see some throws where it's just off target and just is not consistent being able to throw the football down the field. He's a former baseball player, and you kind of see that in the way that he throws it. Like, everything is just a rocket on a line. He does not put air under the football pretty much every time I watch him. And the result is, like, he will, like, go between an incredible pass fit into a tight window downfield to then, like, completely missing or putting one in the dirt. So he definitely has had those inconsistencies with his arm. They don't throw downfield a ton, and can get, if they can get some one-on-one, but for the most part, it's working the short to intermediate game. They like to roll him out a lot and try to give him some quicker throws and keep it to where it's like more an easy picture for him. And also by rolling him out, you get that opportunity. If he can use his legs and run a little bit, that's a big factor for them. Complimenting him in the backfield, and this is going to be a key in this game, has been running back Damon Claiborne, who on the year ran for 907 yards, over 5 yards per carry, had 10 rushing touchdowns, was also a solid receiver out of the backfield. Very talented player, and a guy that I've seen some talk as an NFL draft prospect, and maybe being one of the better running backs available in the upcoming draft. He, it appears, is going to be opting out of this bowl game. I don't think it was made like official, but I believe the way that Jake Dickert, the head coach, kind of spoke about it makes it sound like he's not going to be ready to go, or not going to be able to go in this game. He's declaring for the draft, and he's going to use this as an opportunity for bowl prep. That's a significant loss. That is a massive loss for them, because he has been far and away their best offensive player, and really no one else has come close. Ashford, like I said, has been a good number in the run game, but their number 2 back, Ty Clark, he's only run it 58 times for 232 yards, 3 touchdowns, 4 yards per carry. Has not been involved much. And they're losing some of their other depth guys in the running back room. They're not going to have a ton there. I'm not saying they don't have capable guys, but look, it's not a special offensive line up front either. This is a rushing attack that averages about 4.5 per carry, 157 yards per game. They've done a good job from a sacks allowed standpoint. On the season, they have only given up 16 sacks. Now, some of that is Ashford being able to make guys miss with his legs, but they've done and like I said, I mentioned some of it is the quick passing. They don't do a ton of sitting around in the pocket, but the O-line has played solid this season. It's been an okay group, but it's not a group of guys who are just paving the way. Claiborne has had to make a lot of those runs happen. So for them to probably not have him in this game, that's a big loss for their offense. And it's not the only significant loss. When you look at their receiving core, their top receiver in Chris Barnes, who's a transfer out of Washington State, he was their starting slot receiver, 39 catches, 547 yards, 3 touchdowns. Now, he was not like the go-to guy. They had several other receivers who were kind of in, not several other, but a few other receivers who were kind of in a similar range. Carlos Hernandez was right behind him in terms of production. Sterling Burkhalter, another guy who had decent numbers. Sawyer Racanelli was very impressive in their final game against Duke, so that's a guy who could step in. But Barnes is their top receiver, and moving on. They're also losing Micah Mays Jr., who to the portal, who's a very talented young receiver, who was probably one of their more explosive guys in the receiving core. In fact, over nearly 17 yards per reception, was definitely one of their big play guys at receiver that they have hit in the portal. They do have their top tight end back in Filet, who is, again, a solid player. They've got a decent group of pass catchers, but some of their more talented guys are going to be stepping out. Wake Forest, obviously, look, it's not been a great offense this year. We know Mississippi State has at times struggled to deal with teams that are going to run the football well, but with Claiborne out, top receiver out, I mean, I know State's got some guys going on defense, but this is kind of an early test for a lot. Talked about an early test for Camario. It's an early test for a lot of guys on State's defense too. A defense that was so poor throughout the season, especially the back half of the year. I know Zach Arnett's not calling the defense, but going to be a little bit of a different approach with no Coleman Hutzler on the sidelines. I'm hoping to see a lot of guys step up and have a good game against a not so great offense and kind of show like, hey, we could be foundational pieces next season.